past. We've been told that humanity existed for hundreds of thousands of years without developing until suddenly, in the year 3000 BC, primitive people threw down their spears to build the most magnificent structures humanity has ever been capable of. This is an old guard belief system that has been thoroughly debunked. Still, many in the archaeological community remain stubborn and cling to ideas brought to the mainstream attention, much of this information being completely assumed and not proven hundreds of years ago. If you repeat something enough times, people will begin to believe it. Atlantis is a place of great legend. The question people have been asking for literally thousands of years is, and I quote, was it a real place? A fictional example of a society that rises and falls? Or was it a bit of both, end quote? Like most legends, they're inspired by bits of truth. For millennia, ancient civilizations from all over the world without apparent connection to each other have come up with almost the same storylines in their legends and religious Genesis stories. For example, the epics of Gilgamesh and the story of Utnapishtim and the Great Flood in ancient Babylon, found on tablets considered to have been written around 2100 BC, though some believe as far back as 3000 BC, which is a timeline we will get back to later. The given date for Gilgamesh is, of course, assumed, but nonetheless, it is considered to be one of the first examples of literature in history. There are parts of the storyline that seem unlikely, but nonetheless, the epics of Gilgamesh go as so. As it says, I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh. This was the man to whom all things were known. This was the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise, he saw mysteries and knew secret things. He brought us a tale of the days before the flood. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor. Returning, he rested. He engraved on stone the whole story. Gilgamesh told the story recited to him by Utnapishtim, a king who had once ruled thousands of years earlier. The king survived the great flood, which brought to him the reward of immortality. This reward was due to the king preserving the seeds of humanity in the face of extinction. There were 4 gods who lived on earth: Enlil, the enforcer of divine decisions; Anu, the lord of the firmament; Ishtar, goddess of war and sexual love; and Ea, lord of the waters, man's natural friend and protector. The world multiplied and advanced and became loud. Enlil found the world so loud he could not sleep, so the gods agreed to exterminate mankind. Ea, feeling pity for Utnapishtim, instructed him to build a boat in which he and his family could survive. As the tablets read, tear down your house and build a boat, abandon possessions and look for life, despise worldly goods and save your soul. Tear down your house, I say, and build a boat with her dimensions in proportion, her width and length in harmony. Put aboard the seeds of all living things into the boat. Utnapishtim did as he was told and said the following: I put on board all my kith and kin, put on board cattle, wild beasts from open country, all kinds of craftsmen. The time was fulfilled. When the first light of dawn appeared, a black cloud came up from the base of the sky. It thundered within where Adad, lord of the storm, was rising. A stupor of despair went up to the heaven when the god of the storm turned daylight to darkness, when he smashed the land like a cup. On the first day, the tempest blew swiftly and brought the flood. No man could see his fellow, nor could the people be distinguished from the sky. Even the gods were afraid of the flood. They withdrew. They went up to the heaven of Anu and crouched in the outskirts. The gods cowered like curs, while Ishtar cried, shrieking aloud, "Have I given birth unto these mine own people, only to glut with their bodies the sea as though they were fish?" Utnapishtim continued saying, "For 6 days and nights the wind blew. Torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. Tempest and flood raged together like warring hosts. When the 7th day dawned, the storm from the south subsided. The sea grew calm. The flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world, and there was silence. The surface of the sea straight as flat as a rooftop. All mankind returned to clay. I opened a hatch and light fell on my face. Then I bowed low. I lay down and I wept. The tears streamed down my face, for on every side was a waste of water. 14 leagues distant there appeared a mountain, and there the boat grounded. On the mountain of Nisir the boat held fast. She held fast and did not bulge. When the 7th day dawned, I loosed a dove and let her go. She flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. Then I loosed a swallow, and she flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. I loosed a raven. She saw that the waters had retreated. She ate, she flew around, she cawed, and she did not come back. Now, I'm sure this story immediately reminds you of Noah's Ark and the Genesis flood. God is angered, a flood washes over the world, Noah is warned and builds an ark, ends up on top of a mountain, sends out birds. We've heard it before. He must rebuild humanity and life on earth from there on. The fact is, there are over 500 examples throughout the ancient world of a great flood story. According to studies done on the matter, of 86 stories analyzed, it has been established that 62 of them had to be completely independent of the Mesopotamian and Hebrew accounts. Graham Hancock, the legendary author of Fingerprints of the Gods, Magicians of the Gods, and America Before, among countless other incredible pieces of groundbreaking literature, looks at this phenomenon as perhaps somewhat of a helping hand. That a great civilization was wiped out by a great cataclysm, and a few survived among the hunter-gatherers, the most likely independent people to survive such an incredible cataclysm. There they spread their knowledge of the technology they harnessed to future generations, to the people of Göbekli Tepe and to the Egyptians, and were viewed as gods from there on. These intelligent, advanced people had once been seasteaders. Their original storyline was the same, but like a game of telephone throughout history, their stories differed enough to benefit the cultures of each individual civilization. We've already released a documentary on the ancient cataclysm according to the ancients, and the alarming similarities between the stories of the Incas, Aztecs, Mayans, Olmecs, Egyptians, Indians, Babylonians, Chinese, Sumerians, Greeks, and countless other ancient civilizations. We won't go over all of the examples, as it took an hour-long video to just partially break it down in our past documentary, but for reference, the viewer may watch our past breakdowns of this phenomenon. Nonetheless, religions and cultures around the world swear by this handed-down knowledge. Knowledge we will break down further in this film. Yet, Atlantis is generally laughed at as nonsense, and even to some, as conning. Plato was a great historian. The notion of Plato making up the story of his ancestor Solon meeting with an Egyptian elder in Sais who recounted this lost land of greed and misfortune is more unlikely than it is likely. Many claim Plato made up Atlantis and that his wise ancestor Solon was just used in his storyline. Meanwhile, Herodotus drew a map showing what appeared to be Atlantis in the area of Mauritania a few years after Plato was born. Now, to be fair, it could be a strange translation of Atlas itself. And again, King Atlas reigned in Mauritania. But it's interesting nonetheless, considering the context of the theory we are exploring. Another point worth making about Atlantis is that it is technically Latin and was in a war with Athens. First, what we could be seeing is simply the Latin translation of the original name. Perhaps Atlantis is just a given name for a real place